Guinea, long before the arrival of cranes and concrete towers, there existed a modest settlement hugging the coastline, a patchwork of fishing villages, colonial outposts, and small marketplaces. This was the beginning of Accra, the capital of Ghana, and the heart of a transformation that would later defy its own history. For centuries, Accra's identity was anchored in simplicity. Life revolved around fishing, trade, and survival. Families lived in low-rise structures made of wood, mud, and thatch. Dirt roads formed the main arteries of commerce, winding between neighborhoods that were never designed with the future in mind. The first sparks of structured development came with the British colonial administration, who established Fort James and later built Ushertown and Jamestown as administrative and trading centers. These districts became the earliest colonial nuclei, embedding a pattern of segregation between the European quarters and the indigenous neighborhoods. Yet, even under colonial rule, the city expanded slowly, cautiously. Its growth was organic, unplanned, and often reactive. By the time Ghana gained independence in 1957 under the visionary leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, Accra had become a symbol of aspiration. It was chosen as the capital of a new African republic, carrying the weight of national pride and modern dreams. But independence didn't come with a ready-made blueprint for urban development. The city was still young, and its infrastructure aged quickly. Population growth rapidly outpaced housing and utility services. Unregulated migration from rural areas into Accra created intense pressure on land, services, and social order. Informal settlements began to sprawl in every direction. Nima, Chorkor, and Old Fadama became known for their overcrowded conditions, limited sanitation, and poor infrastructure. These communities were stigmatized, often forgotten by policy, and yet they formed the labor backbone of the city. Street vendors, artisans, porters, many of them resided in these areas, pushing the city forward from the margins. A city under strain, the challenges of growth. The decades following independence were turbulent. Politically, Ghana wrestled with coups, austerity, and restructuring. Economically, the country endured cycles of boom and bust. For Accra, the consequence was stagnation. Housing stock remained largely unchanged, infrastructure decayed, and investment was sparse. Roads were riddled with potholes, water was unreliable, and power outages were commonplace. Yet the city's population continued to swell. Accra's appeal remained magnetic. People came in search of opportunity, education, and a better life. The informal economy grew to absorb them, expanding slums and deepening inequality. By the 1980s and early 1990s, the disparity between the elite enclaves like cantonments and Lebon and the slums of Agbogblashi or Sukura became glaringly visible. Urban planning was not absent, it was simply unable to keep up. Master plans were drawn, but implementation lagged. The city began to suffocate under the weight of its own expansion. Water from the Weja Dam barely reached inner neighborhoods. Sewer systems were overwhelmed or non-existent. The Korla Lagoon became a toxic basin, receiving waste from households and industries alike. Despite these setbacks, a shift was brewing. The tide would soon turn. Part 3, the opening of Ghana, a door to new wealth. In the early 2000s, Ghana began rebranding itself. With democratic stability restored and the economy liberalized, investors started taking notice. Foreign direct investment began to trickle in, initially into mining and telecoms, and later into real estate, banking, and energy. One moment changed everything, the discovery of offshore oil in 2007. The Jubilee Field find was not just a boost to Ghana's economic prospects, it was a psychological shift. For the first time in decades, there was a renewed confidence in Ghana's future. Accra, as the capital, became the center of attention. Real estate developers moved quickly. Previously underdeveloped areas such as Airport Residential, Ridge, and East Legon became hotbeds of construction. Malls, apartment complexes, office towers, and gated communities rose where there were once open fields or modest homes. International companies set up their West African headquarters in Accra. The city began to transform, not gradually, but almost suddenly. Airport City emerged as a new urban business district, designed for modern commerce and luxury. The gleaming facades of buildings like the EcoBank flooding, traffic congestion, and insufficient public services. Part 4. Skyscrapers in smart cities, Accra's aspirational leap. The architectural vocabulary of Accra changed. The glass and steel aesthetic, once foreign, became familiar. Buildings weren't just taller, they were bolder, smarter, and more efficient. Developers imported technology, materials, and talent from abroad. Ghanaian architects returned from Europe and North America, bringing fresh perspectives and digital tools. The government, too, embraced the vision. The Kotoka International Airport's Terminal 3 was completed in 2018, a modern facility rivaling any in Africa. Roads were widened, flyovers constructed, and smart city ideas introduced. One such initiative was Apollonia City, an ambitious mixed-use satellite city designed to ease pressure off central Accra. These projects projected a new image, Accra as a gateway to West Africa, a city not only rising vertically, but also digitally. Government services were being digitized. Property registration, business incorporation, and even driver licensing moved online. Wi-Fi hotspots and broadband services expanded access. However, these advances remained uneven. The digital divide persisted. Inner-city schools and clinics still lacked internet. Slum residents still relied on public toilets and paid exorbitant fees for water from private tankers. The pace of change was stunning, but not everyone could keep up. And infrastructure upgrades, a different story played out just a few streets away. The city's transformation had come with a cost, one not measured in dollars or concrete, but in displacement, inequality, and neglect. The divide between the ultra-modern and the underdeveloped became not just stark, but physical. Take, for instance, East Legon and Medina. These neighborhoods exist side by side, yet the contrast between them is dramatic. East Legon boasts high-end restaurants, boutique apartments, and manicured lawns. Medina, by contrast, is overpopulated, its markets congested, its roads crumbling under traffic and poor drainage. This is not an isolated case. Across Accra, development has followed the money. Private developers, both local and foreign, have focused on high-return projects, luxury apartments, office parks, and retail spaces. These serve the wealthy minority and the growing expatriate community. Meanwhile, housing for the poor has remained largely informal and insecure. The phenomenon of gentrification has deepened this urban crisis. As new developments enter old neighborhoods, land prices rise, property taxes increase, and longtime residents are pushed out. In places like Osu and Roman Ridge, traditional homes have given way to commercial buildings and high-rise apartments. Displacement is subtle at first. Families move further out because they can no longer afford rent. But over time, whole communities are uprooted. Old Fadama, sometimes called Sodom and Gomorrah, became the poster child for Accra's informal housing dilemma. For decades, it grew in the shadows of central Accra, providing shelter to tens of thousands. Despite repeated eviction threats, its population kept rising, testimony to the city's failure to provide affordable alternatives. When demolition finally began, families lost not just homes, but livelihoods. Small businesses, social networks, and cultural spaces vanished overnight. The government has attempted to respond. Affordable housing schemes have been launched, like the Saglemi Housing Project and other social housing initiatives. But most of these efforts have faced challenges. Corruption, mismanagement, underfunding, and poor location choices have rendered many of them ineffective. Saglemi, in particular, became a national scandal, with thousands of uninhabited units standing idle years after construction began. Beyond housing, urban inequality reveals itself in services. Water is available 24/7 in ridge or cantonments, but in Teshi or Chorkor, residents queue for hours at standpipes or rely on tanker services. Electricity is stable in gated communities, but low-income neighborhoods suffer frequent blackouts. Schools and hospitals mirror this pattern, well-resourced in affluent zones, underfunded and overcrowded elsewhere. Infrastructure aside, the psychological gap is growing. There is a class of Ghanaians who experience Accra as a global city, with rooftop bars, e-commerce apps, air-conditioned gyms, and weekend getaways. Then there are millions who live in perpetual survival mode, navigating daily floods, informal transport, and insecure jobs. This double existence raises pressing questions. Can Accra truly develop if it leaves so many people behind? Can the city continue to rise when its foundations are shaky? Part 6. The role of policy, governance, and planning. No city modernizes overnight without policy direction. Accra's transformation, sudden as it appears, is also the result of decades of policies. some intentional, others reactive. Planning institutions like the Accra Metropolitan Assembly AMA and the Town and Country Planning Department have played crucial roles, albeit often constrained by limited capacity and political interference. One of the major shifts in recent years has been decentralization. The division of Accra into multiple municipal assemblies, Ablekuma North, Ayawaso Central, Lade Kotopan, and others, was meant to bring governance closer to the people. In theory, it enables localized planning, budget autonomy, and responsiveness. But in practice, this has sometimes fragmented citywide coordination. Projects often overlap, contradict, or stall due to jurisdictional confusion or lack of funding. Urban planning frameworks like the Greater Accra Metropolitan Area (GAMA) Spatial Development Framework and the National Urban Policy Framework have aimed to streamline city growth. These documents envision Accra as an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable urban center. Yet translating these blueprints into tangible results remains a challenge. Political cycles also affect development continuity. A new government often halts or redirects the projects of its predecessor. Vision becomes fragmented, long-term goals sacrificed for short-term political gains. Projects like the Marine Drive Tourism Initiative or the Accra Urban Transport Project have faced delays or uncertainty due to such shifts. Despite this, some initiatives have gained traction. The Greater Accra Resilient and Integrated Development (GARID) project is one such example. Funded by the World Bank, GARID targets flood mitigation, solid waste management, and infrastructure in low-income communities. It acknowledges that urban development must begin with the vulnerable, not the elite. Similarly, the digital addressing system introduced in recent years is a step toward formalizing land use, improving delivery systems, and boosting emergency response. While adoption has been uneven, it reflects a growing intent to modernize the administrative backbone of the city. Transport reform is another critical area. The Ghana Urban Transport Project (GUP), including the Ayalolo Bus Rapid Transit (BRT) service, was launched to reduce congestion and offer affordable mass transit. However, the system has struggled with inconsistent service, limited routes, and poor maintenance. Still, it laid the groundwork for future upgrades, especially in public mobility. Land reform, too, has been high on the agenda. The complex land tenure system in Ghana, split between state, stool, and private ownership, has made urban planning difficult. Conflicts, encroachment, and legal disputes delay projects and distort property markets. Recent land digitization efforts by the Lands Commission aim to bring transparency and speed to this chaotic process. Planning is not just about blueprints, it's about vision, consistency, and political will. Accra's future depends on how its policies evolve, and more importantly, how they are implemented on the ground. Part 7. Migration, Urban Sprawl, and the Rise of Satellite Cities. Accra's population growth is no accident. Each year, tens of thousands of people from across Ghana and West Africa migrate to the capital. Some come for education, others for business, and many simply to escape the limitations of village life. The city's allure is magnetic and unstoppable, but Accra's land is not infinite. As the core fills up, expansion pushes outward. What began as small towns and farming villages on the periphery have now become urbanized zones. Kasoa, Amasaman, Oyibi, Dodowa, and even Shawam are being drawn into the gravitational pull of Accra. This is urban sprawl in real time. These areas often develop without the benefit of planning. Real estate developers acquire vast plots and build gated communities with little regard for roads, sewage, schools, or clinics. Meanwhile, informal settlers also claim land, building without permits or infrastructure. The result is a patchwork of uncoordinated urban fragments: housing without jobs, roads without drainage, suburbs without connectivity. Satellite city initiatives have emerged in response. Projects like Apollonia City, Renaissance City, and Ningo Prampram's urban plan aim to create new self-contained hubs with residential, commercial, drop, and recreational zones. These smart cities promise to relieve pressure from central Accra and offer a higher quality of life. Apollonia City, for instance, is being developed as a 2,300-acre master plan community. It includes homes, schools, retail centers, and industrial parks. The goal is not just housing, but livability. Similar concepts have been proposed near Tema, Ai Mensa, and in parts of the Volta Basin. But critics warn that unless these satellite cities are integrated with transport systems, they could become enclaves for the wealthy, disconnected from the city's heartbeat and its labor market. Without commuter rail, efficient road networks, and public transport, even the most beautifully designed satellite city may fall short. The challenge remains how to grow outward without collapsing inward, how to connect the new Accra with the old, the periphery with the core, and the built environment with the human need. City. As Accra ascends into a modern metropolis, a critical question surfaces beneath the glittering towers and expansive highways. What happens to culture and identity in a city moving this fast? Accra is not just bricks and mortar. It is also stories, rhythms, dialects, and customs. It is the bustle of Makola Market, the scent of wakia steaming in street stalls, the chants of football fans at the Accra Sports Stadium, and the kente-clad elders sitting in council. This is the heartbeat that modernization often overlooks. Development risks rewriting the city's soul. In the rush to globalize, local character is often sacrificed for generic urban uniformity. Glass towers may symbolize progress, but they also erase architectural traditions shaped over centuries. In many of Accra's upscale neighborhoods, modern villas with imported designs and foreign materials are replacing compound houses with courtyards, verandas, and colorful mosaic tiles. The new buildings are efficient, yes, but are they Accranian? Street life, too, is changing. The once ubiquitous kiosks, chop bars, and roadside tailors are being pushed aside to make way for malls and organized retail spaces. While these changes bring order and formal employment, they also displace informal traders who have long formed the city's economic spine. Street hawking, often criticized for cluttering roads, has been the livelihood of tens of thousands, from young migrants to single mothers. The modern city, in trying to sanitize itself, is also scrubbing away tradition. Gentrification compounds the problem. Traditional communities like Gamashi, with their festivals, clan structures, and fishing rituals, are under threat. The Homowo Festival, an ancient celebration of resilience, still takes place, but it now unfolds against a backdrop of encroaching high-rises, hotel developments, and noise complaints from new tenants unfamiliar with its meaning. Language is also under siege. In posh districts, English dominates. Twi, Giu, and Hausa fade into the background. Younger generations, educated in international schools, sometimes grow up detached from their mother tongues. This linguistic erosion mirrors a broader cultural dislocation, where global identity is gained but local essence is lost. Yet not all is disappearing. Culture is also evolving. Ghanaian music, especially Afrobeats, highlife, and hiplife, has found a global audience. Artists like Sarkodie, Stonebwoy, and Amare are not just entertainers, they're cultural diplomats. Their lyrics blend local slang with global beats, narrating the modern Accra experience. Creative districts like Osu, East Legon, and Lebone have become hubs for art galleries, spoken word events, film screenings, and craft markets. These spaces prove that tradition and modernity can coexist. Accra is not rejecting its culture, it is remixing it. The rise of cultural festivals, Chalewodi Street Art Festival, Afrochella, and the Year of Return events has placed Accra on the global map. These festivals celebrate heritage while welcoming innovation. They gather the diaspora, local creatives, and curious foreigners into one pulsating citywide party. They remind us that modernization does not have to erase identity, it can amplify it. The challenge is balance. Accra must modernize without losing itself. Skyscrapers may shape the skyline, but it is culture that shapes the soul. Part 9. Climate Resilience and Environmental Pressures. Every great city faces natural constraints. For Accra, the threat is not just poverty or inequality, but nature itself. As the city grows rapidly, environmental degradation has become both a symptom and a danger. Flooding is the most visible crisis. Year after year, torrential rains paralyze the city. Streets become rivers, homes are submerged, businesses close, and lives are lost. These floods are not random. They are the result of a city growing faster than its drainage systems. Inadequate gutters, poor waste disposal, and building in waterways have turned rain into disaster. The June 3, 2015 disaster was the city's darkest environmental moment in recent memory. Floodwaters caused a fuel station explosion near Kwame Nkrumah Circle, killing over 150 people. It was a national tragedy, but more importantly, It was a wake-up call. That single event exposed everything wrong with Accra's urban planning: congestion, poor infrastructure, environmental neglect, and institutional failure. In response, efforts were made to dredge the Odal River and improve drainage in flood-prone areas. But these interventions have often been reactive and short-term. Without systemic change, flooding continues. Waste management is another serious problem. Accra generates thousands of tons of waste every day, much of which is improperly disposed of. Plastics clog gutters, pile up in markets, and end up in the sea. The Korla Lagoon, once a thriving water body, has become heavily polluted, filled with industrial waste, domestic sewage, and plastic debris. Agbogblashi, once a thriving food market, became internationally infamous as one of the world's largest e-waste dump sites. Electronics, shipped from Europe and North America, were dismantled in unsafe conditions, releasing toxic fumes and polluting the soil. For years, children and young men worked amid hazardous materials, burning wires to extract copper, inhaling poison for survival. While the site was finally cleared in 2021 by the government, questions remain. What comes next for those displaced? Will the cycle repeat elsewhere? Urban greening has also suffered. Parks and green belts have given way to construction. Trees are felled to make room for roads or apartments. The result is a hotter, drier city. The urban heat island effect is growing. Accra is losing its shade and its lungs. Climate change is accelerating these threats. Rising sea levels endanger coastal neighborhoods like La and Osu. Droughts affect water supply from the Weja and Densu catchment areas. Heat waves increase health risks, especially for the elderly and vulnerable. But it's not all gloom. There is growing environmental awareness, particularly among the youth. Groups like Green Africa Youth Organization and Let's Go Clean the Beach have taken action through cleanup campaigns, tree planting, and advocacy. New regulations are being introduced to ban single-use plastics and promote sustainable packaging. The Garrett Project, mentioned earlier, targets some of these environmental challenges through improved drainage and solid waste management in poor neighborhoods. It is one of the first development projects in Accra to explicitly link climate resilience with urban equity. There are also calls for nature-based solutions: green roofs, urban forests, rainwater harvesting, and wetland protection. Urban planning is beginning to consider sustainability not as an afterthought, but as a core principle. Accra's development story will be incomplete if the environment is sacrificed at the altar of growth. Highways, Accra's transformation rests on a powerful but often invisible force: infrastructure. Roads, telecom networks, power lines, water systems, and digital connectivity, these are the arteries and nerves of the modern city. Without them, even the tallest skyscraper becomes a hollow shell. In the last decade, Accra has seen some of the most aggressive infrastructure investment in its history. The city's highways, for one, have been expanded and upgraded. The Kwame Nkrumah interchange, completed in 2016, dramatically restructured traffic flow in the city center. Known popularly as Dubai Interchange, it symbolizes Ghana's ambition to match the infrastructure of more developed nations. Nearby, the Pokuase Interchange, West Africa's first four-tier interchange, has become another iconic project, easing pressure at one of the city's busiest junctions. Ring roads and arterial routes have also been widened and re-asphalted. The Tema motorway is undergoing rehabilitation to accommodate more vehicles and improve safety. Even inner-city roads in areas like Adenta, Achimota, and Dansoman are receiving long overdue attention. Yet, progress remains uneven. In outer suburbs and informal settlements, road conditions are still poor, dusty during the dry season, impassable during the rains. Electricity access in Accra is relatively high compared to other parts of Ghana. However, power outages, known locally as dumbsore, still disrupt businesses and homes. The government and private sector have invested in solar energy, mini-grids, and alternative power sources to supplement the national grid. Rooftop solar installations are growing in popularity, especially in industrial zones and upper-class neighborhoods. Water supply, meanwhile, remains inconsistent. While some areas enjoy pipe-borne water, others rely on tanker services and boreholes. Aging pipes, low water pressure, and unequal distribution make clean water a luxury in many low-income parts of the city. But beyond the physical, digital infrastructure is rising as Accra's new frontier. The city has become a hub for fintech, e-commerce, and mobile innovation. With over 16 million smartphone users across Ghana, mobile apps now power transport like Uber and Bolt, food delivery, financial services, and even online medical consultations. Innovation hubs like MEST Africa, Impact Hub Accra, and Academic City are training a new generation of tech entrepreneurs. Young coders, app developers, and content creators are transforming Accra into West Africa's Silicon Valley. The Ghana Innovation Hub at Accra Digital Center, in partnerships with international tech companies, are further positioning the city as a knowledge economy. Fintech startups like ZPay, Hubtel, and SlidePay are revolutionizing how people pay, save, and invest. Mobile money has become so widespread that street hawkers and taxi drivers now accept cashless payments. This is not just convenience, it's inclusion. Smart city concepts are also slowly entering the mainstream. The use of CCTV for traffic monitoring, biometric ID systems, drone deliveries, and data-driven urban planning are no longer far-off ideas. Accra is inching toward a future where technology, not just concrete, defines development. But the infrastructure challenge remains twofold: scaling up and bridging the gap. The same digital divide that separates rich and poor globally is taking root locally. High-speed internet is plentiful in Lebon, but sparse in Nima. Modern roads connect high-income zones while slums remain neglected. If Accra is to become a truly modern city, its infrastructure must be inclusive. It must serve the many, not just the few. Part 11: Real Estate Boom and the Housing Crisis. Nowhere is Accra's sudden transformation more visible or more complex than in its real estate boom. Towers rise seemingly overnight. Billboards advertise luxury apartments with names like The Address, Nova Heights, Villaggio Vista, and Silicon Heights. From airport residential to cantonments and from East Lagan to Ridge, the skyline is transforming into a showcase of wealth and ambition. Property prices in these areas now rival those of middle-income cities in Europe. A three-bedroom apartment can cost upwards of $300,000. Renting a two-bedroom flat in a modern complex with 24-hour security, swimming pool, and backup power easily reaches $1,500 to $3,000 per month. For many middle-class Ghanaians, these prices are simply out of reach. So who is buying? A significant portion of this market is driven by the Ghanaian diaspora, international investors, and diplomatic or business expatriates. Many purchase property not to live in, but to invest. Real estate in Accra has become a haven for capital. Unlike the volatile cedi, land and buildings are viewed as stable assets. But this real estate gold rush has created what some call a ghost housing crisis. There is a surplus of high-end homes, many of them empty, and a massive deficit of affordable housing. While concrete is pouring into the sky, millions still live in overcrowded, unsafe, and informal conditions. The slum population in Accra is estimated in the hundreds of thousands. Areas like Old Fadama, Sabonzongo, and Agbaglashi are home to families crammed into wooden shacks with no plumbing, no sewage, and no formal addresses. These settlements may lack legality, but they are full of life. People live, love, work, and raise children there. The problem is not laziness or preference, it's the absence of options. Government housing projects have been few and flawed. The Saglami Housing Project, envisioned as a 5,000-unit affordable housing scheme, became mired in allegations of mismanagement and financial scandal. Years after construction began, most of the units remain uninhabited, decaying under the sun and rain. Other projects, like the Capone Affordable Housing Scheme or the Bortiman Estate, also face slow progress, poor infrastructure, or politicization. The demand is massive, but the supply is slow and inconsistent. Even private developers trying to build for the middle class face obstacles. High interest rates, land litigation, import duties on materials, and bureaucratic delays make affordable construction difficult. Many simply turn to the luxury market, where profit margins are higher. The result is a deeply polarized housing market. The rich live in gated estates with backup power and water tanks. The poor crowd into compound houses or rent single rooms with shared bathrooms. Some sleep in kiosks or vehicles. Others commute for hours from the city's outskirts just to work in central Accra. Land ownership complicates matters further. Much of Accra's land is under customary ownership, controlled by traditional chiefs and families. This creates a legal gray zone where multiple parties may claim the same plot. Disputes are common, and titling is slow. Developers often build first and sort out paperwork later, a dangerous gamble. Meanwhile, urban sprawl continues. People priced out of Accra move to Kasoa, Oyibi, Prampram, or Dodowa, where land is cheaper. But these satellite towns often lack schools, hospitals, or jobs. Without reliable public transport, commuting becomes expensive and exhausting. There are no quick fixes to this crisis, but experts agree on a few necessary steps: digitizing land records, reforming land use policies, providing incentives for affordable housing, and investing in mass transit to connect outer areas. Most importantly, housing must be seen not just as a commodity, but as a right, because a city is not made by towers, but by the people who live in them, and those who are still waiting for a place to call home.